In the shadow of shifting global tensions, NATO gears up for a pivotal nuclear exercise next week. This decision comes on the heels of President Putin's recent changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine, aimed at deterring Western support for Ukraine. With escalating warnings from both sides, questions arise. Why now? Could the approaching US elections play a role? The new NATO Secretary General brings fresh perspectives. Will his leadership shift the balance? We delve into the implication of Russia's doctrine change, the context of nuclear threats, and what a potential Trump or Harris victory could mean for global stability. Welcome to India. Well, welcome back. And NATO is set to conduct its steadfast non-nuclear exercise next week, lasting about 2 weeks and involving 2,000 personnel and 60 aircraft from 13 nations across 8 bases. This drill follows Vladimir Putin's recent changes to Russia's nuclear policy aimed at confronting the West. The Daily Express US reports that the exercise will take place primarily in the North Sea, 900 kilometers from Russia, with no live munitions used. NATO officials, including Secretary General Mark Rutte, have emphasized the importance of demonstrating readiness to respond to threats, particularly from Russia, which has intensified its nuclear capabilities in recent years. NATO remains vigilant but sees no imminent nuclear threat from Moscow, despite ongoing provocations. As NATO prepares for its annual nuclear exercise, steadfast noon, set to begin next week, the stakes are elevated amid rising tensions with Russia. The exercise comes amid President Putin's recent shifts in Russia's nuclear doctrine, heightening concerns of miscalculations in an increasing volatile environment.
As the world holds its breath, NATO gears up for its annual nuclear exercise, Steadfast Noon, set to commence next week. This long-planned drill, involving 2,000 personnel and 60 aircrafts from 13 nations, unfolds against a backdrop of escalating tensions with Russia. Lately, President Vladimir Putin announced significant changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine, a move aimed at deterring Western support for Ukraine. In London, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte emphasized the importance of these drills, stating,
"In an uncertain world, it is vital that we test our defense and that we strengthen our defense so that our adversaries know that NATO is ready and is able to respond to any threat."
Angus Lepsley, NATO's Assistant Secretary General for Defense Policy and Planning, noted that drills are crucial for demonstrating the alliance's nuclear capabilities. Yet, as NATO prepares to flex its muscles, the implications are profound. Putin has repeatedly warned of potential nuclear consequences if Russia faces conventional attacks. The rhetoric between Russia and the West has intensified since the start of the Russian-Ukraine war in 2022. While NATO insists that Steadfast Noon is not a direct response to recent Russian threats, the timing has raised alarms. Critics argue that such exercises could escalate tensions and lead to miscalculations on both sides. In this precarious landscape of military posturing and nuclear deterrence, the stakes are higher than ever, as both sides navigate a complex web of military maneuvers and political statements that could easily spiral into broader conflict if not carefully managed.
Well, welcome back. And for more analysis of NATO's upcoming nuclear exercise and the current geopolitical climate, NATO is set to hold a major nuclear exercise next week, shortly after President Putin's announced changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine. Joining us today from Rome, Paolo Mori, a military analyst, and Nicholas Williams, a former NATO official from London. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Mr. Mori, to start with, why is NATO conducting this major nuclear exercise at this very particular time, especially after President Putin's recent change to Russia's nuclear doctrine?
Exercises that NATO practice every year, so it doesn't really have a kind of political meaning. NATO yearly does some kind of exercise about nuclear forces and nuclear preparation. So it's not pretty much new to this kind of environment, despite the war, clearly.
So we're not speaking here about a certain timing. We're speaking about just a routine exercise, right?
Yeah.
This is what you're saying.
It's an yearly exercise that NATO does until years. So it's just to get ready for the preparation of nuclear forces and nuclear actions. It's a routine. It's a routine exercise.
Right. Mr. Williams, why is NATO's exercise particularly significant at this very particular moment?
Well, I think it's significant because the Russians think it's significant. And also it's significant because, yes, the Colonel is correct, entirely correct, that NATO exercises every year, either on a paper desk exercise with high decision makers or in using military capabilities. But these exercises have become much more important, and NATO has ascribed much more significance to these exercises in the past few years, especially with the invasion of Ukraine. 20 years ago, no one even mentioned these exercises, although they were taking place.
Mr. Mori, back to you. And what does it mean for Russia to alter its nuclear doctrine, and how is this viewed by the West?
Okay, this is the main question. This is the real political science. And this political science coming from Moscow because in this case, we are talking about the nuclear doctrine, so the wide range of operation concerning the utilization of nuclear weapons. And this comes in this particular period because Moscow knows that it has some difficulty in the conflict because of the West intervention and the West support of the Ukraine forces. Moscow already had this kind of saber rattling of nuclear power from the very beginning of this war, but it's far more important because right now, it's my opinion that this changing in the nuclear doctrine is practically toward the support from third countries to another country that is involved in a war, in a conflict with the Russian Federation. So this is a real political sign. But it's my opinion that, again, we are facing a Russian propaganda because Moscow knows that its conventional forces are not strong enough to face an all-scale war toward NATO. So the only real and clear deterrence for Russia is its nuclear arsenal.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Williams, there is a new NATO Secretary General, and he is now leading the NATO. How from your point of view, would the leadership of a new Secretary General to the NATO influence the overall strategy and those exercises this year?
Well, the NATO Secretary General, of course, is politically very important. He's the face of NATO, but he can't decide anything unless the member states agree that he should say something or that he can do something. In my view, it's very important that Mark Rutte comes from a country which has always supported nuclear deterrence and has been a transatlanticist in orientation. So that's very important. And it's very important that Mr. Rutte has a good relationship, not a frictional relationship, with Trump, President Trump. And so he will be a good figurehead, spokesman, but these military operations and nuclear operations, exercises have been planned for years in advance, or scheduled years in advance.
Yes, we'll get back to this very particular point of Trump and Harris in a moment, but getting back to you, Mr. Mori, and with Mark Rutte now as the new Secretary General, how might his leadership change the dynamics within the alliance?
The things that I can say more than my colleague is that Mark Rutte is it's a person with a good pragmatism. He knows the threats of the NATO, and he knows that Russia is not the only threat to the NATO. He can take a look southward. That's the most important thing for Italy, for Spain, for Greece too, and even for Turkey. And in this period, I think that being Dutch, it's a good compromise between the two souls inside the NATO, the eastern one and the western one, because they perceive the Russian threats in a different way, as we know. By the way, is clearly a person, a man, a politician that is strongly committed with transatlantic links. So it's a step forward for the NATO to get all together and stronger the alliance within the Europe and the US.
Mm-hmm. Mr. William, what role do you believe the United States and the United Kingdom play in reinforcing NATO's nuclear posture during these exercises?
Well, yes, very important roles, but you can't, because the UK is contributing to NATO's nuclear deterrence, but you can't forget the roles of other countries in what they call nuclear burden sharing. Italy, Germany, Belgium, for example, have the capability to deliver American nuclear weapons by air to, as part of the NATO's deterrence posture, by air into Russia and against Russia if it would attack NATO. And so and other countries participate in this nuclear burden sharing. So it's not just the nuclear possessors that have the responsibility and the duty to participate in these exercises. Every country in NATO has a role in effect.
Yes, Mr. Mori, we spoke about the role played by the US and the United Kingdom. Now, we want to speak about the role that is to be played by the NATO after a new leadership. And what should be its approach, and what should be the next steps?
Well, I guess that NATO approach it will be quite the same, because as I already told, the threats are the same of the past years. So it must be the same configuration, the same kind of interaction between allies. Practically, the main goal is to reinforce the eastern flank of the alliance. And under this point of view, I heard that the brigades, the army brigades, will be augmented on that flank. Possibly even the air defense control, the air defense surveillance of the NATO airspace will be enhanced. So in future, it's my opinion that NATO should consider the main threat coming from Russia, but should not forget the other threat coming from the southern flank. We have the Sahel region in Africa that is destabilized, and Russia is one of those countries that contributes to this kind of destabilization by propaganda and whatever. So it's my opinion that NATO should get another focus on that side, on the southern flank of the alliance.
What you mean here is the areas of influence of Russia, and Africa is part of that. This is what you meant here.
Yes, exactly.
We'll get back to that.
Russia has a long time history of influence in Africa, in northern Africa, and in the Sahel region, and clearly right now Moscow utilize all of these tools to try to tear apart the Western links between all these nations that are from the past colonization from the European, like France, or even other countries like for example Germany, and so he tried to insert himself in this political region to detach the Western influence in this area.
Right. Before we get back to that, which you have opened a very important area here for talking, but before we delve deeper into our discussion, let's take a moment to examine Russia, NATO, and Western relations. So stay with us. Right, welcome back, and back to you, Mr. Williams. And in your view, what implications does President Putin's recent rhetoric regarding the nuclear capabilities have on NATO's strategic planning?
Well, I think Mr. Putin's remarks are not strategic. They're designed purely in the context of Ukraine. The Russians are, if not winning, they're pushing back the Ukrainians. They're on the Ukrainians are on the defensive, and what the Russians are doing and what Putin is doing is what in nuclear terms, we call declaratory policy. You signal to your opponent, and in this case, NATO, that if they are considering getting more involved or approving long-range missiles to be targeted against Russia, then Russia would consider using nuclear weapons. And it's purely, in my view, not strategic, but designed to deter NATO from getting more involved in Ukraine at the point of Ukrainian defensiveness and even defeat. And that's the long and the short of it.
Mr. Mori, from your perspective, in what scenarios do you think the threat of using nuclear weapon becomes relevant, and how far is that, or could that be a realistic option?
Well, so I'm gonna answer from the last question. I don't think that it's a credible scenario. As we know, Russia can use, by his following its nuclear doctrine, tactical nuclear weapons, but it's politically they're not expendable. So in which cases? First, mainly because it could be coming from a threat, from a direct threat to the territory of the Russian Federation, a vital kind of threat. So it's not just like the little invasion of Ukrainian forces in Kursk region, not even the using of long-range weapons. Ukrainians are already using long-range weapons because we have UAV drones that hits far inside the Russian Federation. So, as already mentioned, I think that we are talking about more propaganda than the real will to use some kind of tactical nuclear weapons. In these cases, I already told you, they can be used only according to the nuclear doctrine, to the Russian nuclear doctrine, only if there is a serious, a vital threat to the unity and to the system of the Russian Federation.
Mr. William, some speculate that this escalation may be linked to the upcoming US elections. And you spoke respectively about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the US elections are Mr. Putin's mind, but his main concern is to make sure that the war in Ukraine goes his way. But he has an eye on the US elections. Harris, he said in an offhand remark, he would prefer. I really don't think that he would prefer anyone, or either of the two candidates, because the United States will pose a problem to Russia, whatever administration is in place in January. And the Russians fear NATO and the American power within NATO much more than they fear any of the candidates.
Right. That was Mr. Paolo Mori, a military analyst, and Nicholas Williams, a former NATO official. Thank you both, gentlemen, for your insightful analysis. And as NATO prepares for its significant nuclear exercise, the world holds its breath, aware that each drill echoes the delicate balance of power reminding us that vigilance is vital in these uncertainties or these timings. That brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth, so stay tuned for the upcoming episodes on Qnews. Many thanks for watching.